Welcome to The Undefined Leader, where we reimagine leadership, redefine work, and get curious. This is episode 6, and I finally remember the intro. I didn't have to read it for the first time.
Wow.
Derek, what are we curious about today?
We are curious about leading multi-generational teams and leadership styles and everything as it relates to multiple generations.
I am really interested in this subject. We weren't going to have this episode about this. And as we were doing research, we kind of got sidetracked from this one sentence I read, and I just had to know more. So now we're going to talk about it today. The sentence I read was that today, in 2025, this is the first time in history that we have this many generations in the workforce. First time in history. We have 5 generations in the workforce right now.
Who do we've got? We've got the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Gen X.
Mm-hmm.
We've got the millennials. We've got Gen Z.
Gen Z.
And there's still, even before the baby boomers, there's still the silent generation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're getting ready for retirement, but there's still quite a few that are still in the workforce today.
Yeah.
For probably the next 3 years or so.
Our previous president, President Biden, was silent generation. He was still in the workforce as
well. That is true.
And we've got many, not only elected officials, but still people running their companies that are part of that generation as well, the silent generation.
5 generations in the workforce for the first time in history. Does that shock you at all?
It doesn't necessarily shock me, but I think what it does is it makes you think about, oh, wow, like that's a new set of leadership skills now that leaders haven't necessarily needed to have before, especially if you're, up at the top of that range, needing to lead down across 4 to 5, or if you're kind of in the middle, needing to lead both directions. That just adds to the depth of leadership ability that you're going to need to have.
Yeah. Let's talk about that today, of how to actually lead a multi-generational team. But before we go into that, let's just talk through the challenges of having a multi-generational team, but also the benefits. Because something that bothered me when I was doing research is most of the articles I read were focused on the challenges. Mm-hmm. And we hear the challenges a lot, often, and even in social media, where we hear different generations complaining about each other and not being able to work very easily together. So let's talk about that. But at the same time, I really want us to focus a little bit on, this is a very unique situation that we're in. So how do we take advantage of this unique situation? What are the benefits that could come out of it too?
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating, actually. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Let's do it. So what are some challenges that come to your mind in a multi-generational team?
Well, I think we could start with why are there different generations, right? Because they went through different experiences. They lived through different historical events. So they're going to have different perceptions of everything, and they're going to have different preferences for things, even, something like communication. Like each generation is going to have a preference on how you communicate with them and how they communicate, just based on the era of life that they went into. Some of the older generations didn't grow up with a phone in their hand. Some of them didn't have internet. They're going to value face-to-face, versus some other generations are going to value text messaging and Slack messages. So that's kind of what jumps into my mind, is just the preferences and the perceptions that each one is going to have. What about for you?
Yeah, and for that communication style, I think that's a really big one for sure. Because if we even look at like the traditionalist generation, they really care about that personal touch, handwritten notes, letters. And then when you look at baby boomers, Gen X's, they really care about what is the most efficient, what is the most effective, how do we get things done quickly. And then when you look at the millennials and Gen Z's, what they care about the most is that personal connection, belonging, and community. So that in itself could cause a lot of challenges, to your point of, if we have, let's say, a baby boomer that's just trying to get things done very efficiently and effectively, and they're communicating that way, versus a millennial who's caring and wanting that personal touch, that in itself is going to cause some conflict as well. So I think communication is definitely one of them. The other thing is just where they are in their life right now, the stage of life that they're in. Some have kids, then some have kids that are already graduated and have their own
Grandkids.
careers and grandkids, and some are feel like kids still and just getting into the workforce and eager. So I think that in itself, it could cause challenges.
Yeah, well, that relates to, the ideas about work-life balance. The different generations have different perceptions and preferences for things like that. And if your leader is one generation and you're one, or you're the leader and you're working with others, I think it's important to have that awareness of how you view the lens of the world is going to be different with the generations, and what you might value and prioritize is going to be different across the generations. And so, as we've been talking about like coaching styles itself in the previous episodes, we've talked about how a modern leader really needs to have empathy and emotional intelligence, I think, and that ability to maybe, if like as a millennial, speaking for myself, like, do I have the empathy and the ability to look through the lens of like a boomer or through a Gen X or through a Gen Z and kind of see how they're looking at the situation, and kind of have some empathy there and some emotional intelligence. Yeah, I agree. I find this topic so fascinating to begin with. I've done some like presentations at conferences and things on this particular topic, but I think part of why I find it fascinating is I think that there's almost like a starvation out there for info on this, because Alex, how often do you hear from a leader of just don't understand the new generation?
All
Or
the time.
how often do you hear from the new generation, like, what are you guys doing? Like, I'm now in this workforce with all of you, and you guys have put up with this for how long? And right, they're questioning everything.
Yeah. And I remember, Derek, when we first met, when you were giving those conference topics, the first topic was millennials, how to hire millennials, retain millennials, and understand millennials. And then it felt like almost 2 years, 3 years later, it was the same exact subject, but now it's for Gen Z. So it's something that no matter what the generation is, with each new generation that comes into the workforce, there's always a little bit of a shakeup. There's always something that changes. There's an uneasiness. There are challenges that come with it. And hopefully today we can talk through some of the benefits of that too, and how to lead up and down the generations.
So I'm curious with what you were looking into. We talked about with challenges for communicating. We talked about challenges of just maybe like what are the rules about like work-life balance, and what is valued? Is it being a workaholic, or is it having strong boundaries? Because again, that's kind of a spectrum there across generations. Like, what else were you seeing that typically gets thrown out there as the challenges of it?
I think what they're motivated by is something that came up quite often. So, for example, like you said, work-life balance. Well, when you look at baby boomers, what they are motivated by is getting things done, working, spending long hours on a project and feeling needed by their company and having job security. That's what they're motivated by. Versus when you look at Gen X, they're not motivated by that at all. They actually are doing, what did I call it? A mini retirement?
Yeah, the micro retirement.
The micro, yeah,
Yeah,
they're
they're like
micro
micro dosing
retiring right
retirement.
now. Yes, versus the baby boomers are not retiring. There are so many baby boomers that are saying, I'm never going to retire, or I'm going to retire. And the age that they're putting out there is so much further out than what we're used to. So that in itself, I think, creates a lot of different motivation and also expectation from each other. For example, if you have a boss that's a baby boomer, and their expectations might be that you have to work on the weekends. And when I ask you to do something, it has to get done right away. It has to be speedy, and you should work extra hours for it. Versus a millennial or a Gen X might think that's not something that's motivating to them at all. So they're just not going to do it. So that in itself would cause conflict.
Yeah, with you know, with the baby boomers, if you think about like when they were entering the workforce, and kind of like the pivotal core moments of the start of their career, and then you compare that all the way, down a number of generations to like when Gen Z was first starting to enter the workforce. We were in the middle of a pandemic, Like nothing was normal at all as the Gen Zs, 4 or 5 years ago were just starting to enter the workforce. So even there, like the Gen Zs don't even know what it means necessarily to have like a normal operation of things. It's always kind of been a flexible hybrid, like working around it, versus, the baby boomers were entering. I mean, it's the boom is, a big aspect of it during like a post World Wars, kind of like the US becoming the superpower and economic takeover, just a whole different setup there of, like they could all, the baby boomers are like 22 years old and buying homes and having kids and kind of settling down into what I think a lot of people would label like the American dream sort of thing. And then you've got Gen Z, who many have resigned themselves to they're never going to be able to afford a home. You've got them on the same team with each other. And the baby boomers are like, oh, you know what you need to do? You need to settle down, buy a house. And the Gen Zs are like, okay, boomer, have you
And
looked
you
at the
need to
price
work
of,
harder in order to get a job. Like their way
yeah,
of thinking of how to get there is, well, just work
just
harder.
work harder.
Well, just work more hours. Like to them, they don't see that world has changed.
Mm-hmm.
The prices have changed. I definitely agree. So I want to stop here about the challenges because it was a little bit of a pet peeve of mine that every single article I read was just so focused on the challenges. Let's focus on the benefits of this. This is a very unique situation. So in history, this is the very first time that we have this diverse of a group that's working together. So we could focus on the challenges, yes, and we'll talk about some ways that you can overcome it. But let's focus on the pros of it as well. What do you think is the biggest benefit of 5 generations working together?
Well, for me, it's just what you said. It's the diversity there of you have so much experience. You've got, especially like with the young, experience with technology their whole life, and they're good with it. You've got different life experiences. You have that diversity of opinions that can really be harnessed, I think, and brought together. So you have with more generations, you have abundance of more ideas and more innovative thoughts. What were you thinking?
Completely agree with you. Innovation and creativity don't come from a group of people that have the exact same philosophies, exact same lifestyle, exact same perspective. It comes from a diverse group of people working together and being able to share each other's perspectives to find a unique solution to a problem. And I think that's where innovation comes from. So, as a leader, if you were leading a team of 5 generations or maybe 4 generations, how do you think you can harness that diversity and make it into creativity, innovation?
I think I'm curious your thoughts on this as well, because I know you do lead a team that has multiple generations on it. And when I ran my business, I had quite a range of generations on my team, and I always enjoyed it. I didn't want like a accidental core value of like we're a certain generation. Like I wanted that diversity. But I think for me, it starts with finding the common goal or mission that's going to appeal to all of the generations, like finding that common ground of what is it that we're all kind of united and passionate about as the baseline that we can then bring our different perspectives and different ideas and different outlooks into. But I think it kind of needs to start there, and that is the leader's skill set there, or whether you're approaching it with a more collaborative, where we're going to come up with this idea together, but where can we find that common ground of something that, as a multi-generational team, we're all united that this is what we're going to do together. What about for
Mhm.
you?
I like that. I was just thinking about, I have worked mainly with a lot of generations above me. So even when I first joined the workforce, professional workforce, I was 23 and I was coaching business owners that were 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, or even my coworkers were 40 to 50-year-old. And so there was a big challenge of who is this little girl teaching me how to run my own business? And I had to overcome that perspective. So I really like what you said of having a common goal, because it doesn't end up being a finger pointing of who are you to tell me what something is, but we're both working on something together that's going to be better for both of us at the same time. So I do like that starting with goal. And I think that creates empathy too. The solution I came up with is mentoring. And I found this concept called reverse mentoring. Have you heard of reverse mentoring
No,
before? Okay,
curious.
so mentoring traditionally comes from someone that's been in the company for a really long time or higher up in the hierarchy or has more experience and knowledge, mentoring someone with less experience, less knowledge, less time in the field, correct?
Mhm.
Reverse mentoring says, well, mentorship should be a two-way street. It shouldn't be the person that has the most experience that's just saying, this is how you're supposed to be doing things, Derek, but it should be a two-way street. So why not force mentorship a little bit by reversing it, first of all? So if you have younger generations in your team, let's say a millennial or a Gen Z, have them mentor the older generations or the people that have been in your team for a longer period of time. Everyone has their strength. Every person, every human, every generation, we have our own strengths. And so when you create this mentoring program in your company, I think you automatically open people's minds and also allow the younger generations to actually speak up about their ideas too. You give it a safe place of the purpose of this, the goal of this entire experiment is to learn from each other. What do you think of that?
I like that. And I could see that working kind of both ways in that I know with like Gen Zs, they're not super big fans of structured hierarchy, as well of, hey, you're the newbie, so just be quiet, and you gotta earn your way up, or earn your right to speak in meetings and things like that. I think sometimes there's that downward pressure, right? And then from the boomers as well, they do place a high emphasis on wanting to be respected for their experience and not kind of overlooked for that. And so I think there's an opportunity there just to create a conversation between those two groups that allow the younger generation to have a voice, which maybe, in generations past, that younger generation wasn't as allowed as much of a voice. They had to earn their status first.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at the same time, if that's happening, there will be a respect for the more senior generations as well, and kind of respecting their experience when it creates a conversation and exchange of ideas. So I really like that for opening up communication within a team.
And hoping that that's just the beginning of it. But if you share that this is the culture now, we collaborate our own ideas and it doesn't matter your age or experience, everyone has a say in it. I think you open that up to other meetings now. You'll see that the communication starts changing in how we show up in the day to day.
Yeah, I, I like that. And there's this line, I forget where I heard it from. I don't know if it was when I was doing my master's degree, if I just picked it up somewhere else, but it's coach the individual, not the generation. And so I think that I think it's really important to have this understanding of the different generations, especially when as a company or a leader, you're trying to solve a problem. Like, why are we not getting Gen Zs applying to our job posts? Right? Well, there's obviously something we're doing as a company that's not appealing. We've got it in a blind spot and we need to make like macro changes. Or why do we not retain a, a certain generation? Like I think really understanding the generations helps with macro things, but then I think it can also be problematic for micro moments. Maybe what you were talking about, Alex, is if the focus is such on the challenges, we maybe get too micro, and we want to mentor and coach the individual and coach the individual. And I think that's what you're speaking there with, of like creating like these mentorship programs and other things like that within the company, so that it still remains about the individual more than the generation. We're not creating like these clicks or accidentally, hey, I'm going to email this group, I'm going to text this group, right? And doing too big of brushes on things, that it is still about the individual as much as, we like to get into this generational topic.
Person first. It's who is in front of me, who is this person, what are their strengths and weaknesses, then trying not to generalize too much of assuming what I think I know that you value just because of your generation as well.
Yeah. The stereotypes, right?
Yeah.
The stereotypes can be helpful with macro type of changes. I think it's beneficial of that to be thinking about what does the generation want and use it in a positive type of way. But yeah, not taking macro stereotypes and applying them in micro scenarios to be able to connect one-on-one, regardless of the generation.
So far we're saying the biggest benefit of this unique situation is the diversity and how it can create innovation and creativity and just having a diverse group of people together. Who knows what's going to happen? So one of the ways that we said that you can do that is having a mutual goal. So we're all know what the playing field is and we have a mutual goal. Doing people first. So not just looking at the entire generation, but knowing who the person is sitting in front of you. And then creating a culture of collaboration where it doesn't matter how long you've been in a business for or how old you are, knowing what your strength is and being able to mentor each other and creating a safe place for collaboration and continuous learning as well. Anything else we want to add to that list of how to manage a multi-generation team?
Yeah, it kind of directly goes off of what you just said there, where the different generations have different perceptions and different preferences. But there is still, I think, an idea that truth isn't generational. So I think like for the leader, and even just as the leader, to model this and create a culture of being able to speak honestly and authentically, truthfully, with empathy, and that can go across all of the generations. So as the leader, things like the current state of the company, the financials, the market, all of those things, like we can find like objective truth and the ability to do that with empathy and with self-awareness and with emotional intelligence, regardless of the generations that make up your team, is I think an important component of this, and not falling into traps, I think, of, well, Gen Zs, they're soft. They can't handle this, or baby boomers. I think truth with empathy is not constrained to any type of generational. And I think all of the generations value a leader that can speak truth and can speak authenticity with empathy as a communicator.
And developing your communication skills. So when you're sharing information and you have that empathy, what you're saying and the words you're saying align with whoever you're speaking to in your team, and they're able to understand it at the same time, really get motivated by whatever you're sharing with them as well. Because like we said earlier, each generation is motivated by something a little bit different. And so I think as a leader, you have to have really good communication skills to be able to overcome that.
Yeah, just a desire as the leader to elevate everyone around you and on your team, regardless of generation, regardless of your bias towards the generations or the biases of each other, of being the leader. Like that's a huge responsibility. And I think should be a focus of, how do I elevate every single person, regardless of generational differences?
And I think that goes back to goal setting, which we've talked about in different episodes as well. But again, setting goals of, you could have a goal for the company and the team, but then meeting with each individual, no matter what their generation is, and understanding their personal why and how their why and their motivation aligns with the overall goal that we're trying to do as well.
Absolutely.
Anything else we want to add to the list?
I think that's a good plan. This was helpful for me, just to kind of organize my thinking around this as a leader. And, I work with across multiple generations as well. And so hopefully this was helpful for others listening to it, to kind of have that thought process to walk through as the leader.
I found a infographic that was really beneficial for me. So I'll add it to the comments here. Hopefully it's beneficial for everyone else as a visual of what we discussed today. And as always, if you have any additional thoughts, comment or DM us.